Imagine that everything you have ever experienced, every face, every sound, every memory, every fear, every moment of joy, has occurred in exactly one place. Not in the world outside you, but inside your mind. This idea isn't new, and it isn't just philosophical speculation. Variations of it appear in neuroscience, physics, psychology, and even computer science. The unsettling question is not whether the external world exists, but whether you ever directly experience it at all. What if reality, as you know it, is not something you're inside of, but something your mind is continuously creating for you? To understand this, we need to begin with something simple and undeniable. You have never experienced the world directly. You have only experienced electrical signals interpreted by your brain. Light does not enter your mind as trees, faces, or stars. It enters as photons hitting the retina, triggering chemical reactions that become electrical impulses. Sound does not arrive as voices or music. It arrives as air pressure waves vibrating tiny bones converted into neural activity. Touch, taste, smell. None of them arrive as themselves. They arrive as data. Your brain takes that data and builds a convincing model of something it calls the world. At no point do you step outside your own perception to verify that what you're experiencing matches what truly exists. You are sealed inside your own awareness, receiving signals, interpreting patterns, and assuming that what appears is what is real. This assumption works well enough for survival, but it raises a disturbing possibility. Reality might not be what you think it is. It might not even be out there in the way you imagine. Consider a dream. While dreaming, you see landscapes, people, and entire narratives unfold. You feel emotions that seem real. You hear sounds, speak words, make decisions. While the dream is happening, it feels like a complete reality. Only when you wake up do you realize it was generated entirely by your mind. The characters were not external beings. The environment did not exist in physical space. And yet, the experience felt real while it lasted. Now ask yourself, how do you know waking reality isn't doing something similar? You might say, because the waking world is consistent, it follows rules, it persists even when I'm not paying attention. But this confidence rests on memory and expectation, both of which are also mental constructs. You assume the world continues when you're not looking because your mind tells you it does. You believe other people exist independently because your mind presents them that way. But you never step outside your consciousness to confirm any of it. This leads to a concept known as philosophical idealism, the idea that reality is fundamentally mental. According to this view, matter does not create mind. Mind creates matter, or at least the appearance of matter. Objects exist only as experiences within consciousness. A table is not an independent thing out there. It is a collection of sensations, hardness, color, shape, that appear in awareness. This sounds extreme, but even modern neuroscience supports part of this idea. Your brain does not passively receive reality, it actively predicts it. Studies show that perception works more like a controlled hallucination than a direct recording. Your brain constantly generates predictions about what it expects to see, hear, and feel, then updates those predictions based on incoming data. What you perceive is the brain's best guess, not a direct window into reality. In other words, you are not seeing the world as it is. You are seeing the brain's interpretation of what it thinks is most likely there. This becomes even more unsettling when we look at how easily perception can be manipulated. Optical illusions, auditory hallucinations, phantom limb sensations all demonstrate that the brain can generate experiences without any external cause. People can feel pain in limbs that no longer exist. They can hear voices in silence. They can see movement where nothing is moving. If perception were a direct reflection of reality, none of this would be possible. So where does reality actually exist? From your perspective, it exists nowhere except in your mind. This doesn't mean nothing exists outside of you. It means you have no direct access to whatever does. There may be an external world, but you never encounter it raw. You encounter a simulation constructed by neural processes. You live inside a model, not the thing itself. Now consider this. If all experience happens in the mind, then everything meaningful, love, fear, identity, time, also exists only there. Your past does not exist anywhere except as a memory. Your future exists only as anticipation. Even the present moment is processed milliseconds after it happens. You are always slightly behind, experiencing a reconstructed version of now. This creates a strange implication. If the mind is generating reality moment by moment, then reality itself might not be stable. It might only exist as long as it is being perceived. Some interpretations of quantum physics echo this idea. At the smallest scales, particles do not behave like solid objects. They exist as probabilities, waves of potential, until measured. Observation seems to play a role in determining outcomes. While this does not prove reality is mind-created, it does suggest that observation and existence are deeply linked. If reality requires observation, and observation requires consciousness, then consciousness may be more fundamental than matter. But whose consciousness? You experience reality from one perspective, yours. Everything appears centered around you. Sounds come to you. Images appear before you. Thoughts arise within you. You never experience the world from outside your own point of view. This has led some thinkers to a radical idea known as solipsism, the belief that only your mind is certain to exist. Even if solipsism is false, it highlights something important. Your entire universe is filtered through one consciousness. Every fact you know, every person you've met, every idea you've considered exists only as an experience within awareness. There is no bypassing this. Now imagine that instead of being a window into a shared external reality, your mind is more like a projector. It takes raw inputs, if there even are raw inputs, and renders a coherent world. Space, time, objects, and even your own body appear within this projection. You don't exist inside your body. Your body exists inside your experience. This flips the usual understanding completely. Instead of consciousness being produced by the brain becomes something that appears within consciousness. Instead of you being a small observer in a vast universe, the universe becomes something appearing within you. This idea is deeply uncomfortable because it dissolves the boundary between what is real and what is experienced. It suggests that reality is not something you discover, but something that happens to you. And if that's true, then reality might be far more fragile and far more personal than we assume. But here's where it becomes even stranger. If reality exists only in the mind, then what happens when attention fades? When awareness shifts? When consciousness changes? The world you experience while awake is not the same world you experience while dreaming, imagining, or dissociating. Entire realities can rise and fall depending on mental state. Under certain conditions, deep meditation, sensory deprivation, extreme stress, people report the world dissolving. Objects lose meaning, the sense of self fades, time collapses. These experiences suggest that reality is not fixed, but assembled. And when the assembly process is interrupted, reality itself begins to unravel. So perhaps the world doesn't exist continuously. Perhaps it flickers into being, moment by moment, reconstructed each time consciousness engages with it. If that's the case, then the most fundamental question is not, what is reality made of, but why does it appear at all? Why does consciousness generate a world instead of nothing? Why does it produce laws, patterns, continuity? Why does it create the illusion of persistence, of objects existing when unseen? One possibility is that this structure is necessary for stability. A chaotic or constantly shifting reality would be unusable. So the mind creates rules, expectations, and consistency, not because they are objectively true, but because they allow experience to function. In that sense, reality could be less like a fact and more like a story, a convincing narrative that consciousness tells itself to remain oriented. And if reality is a story, then the self is a character within it. Your name, your history, your personality, all constructs layered on top of raw awareness. They feel solid because they are repeated, reinforced, remembered. But they are no more permanent than any other mental structure. This raises a final, unsettling thought for now. If everything you experience exists only in the mind, then the line between internal and external collapses. Thoughts are no less real than objects. Emotions are no less real than landscapes. Fear can be as tangible as stone, and the world itself becomes something that arises, lingers, and dissolves within awareness. If reality is something your mind is continuously generating, then the next question becomes unavoidable. What exactly is doing the generating? We casually say the mind, but that word hides more than it explains. Is the mind a thing, a process, an illusion, or simply a label for something deeper that cannot be easily defined? And if reality only appears within it, then understanding the nature of the mind becomes the same as understanding the nature of existence itself. Most people assume the mind is produced by the brain. Neurons fire, chemicals flow, and somehow awareness emerges. But notice something subtle here. Everything you know about the brain, neurons, scans, images, diagrams, appears within your experience. You've never encountered a brain directly. You've seen representations of brains, pictures, models, medical illustrations. Those too exist only as perceptions in consciousness. So claiming that the brain creates the mind relies on something that already appears inside the mind. It's a loop. This doesn't mean the brain isn't important. It means our usual explanation might be backward. Instead of consciousness emerging from matter, matter might be something consciousness uses to explain its own patterns. The brain could be a symbol the mind uses to represent its activity within the story of reality. Think about how video games work. The characters in the game might have a detailed explanation for their world. They might believe their universe is generated by physical laws within the game. But the true source of the game, the computer, the electricity, the code, exists outside their framework entirely. From inside the game, those deeper layers are invisible. They can only explain what they experience using the tools available within the simulation. Your mind might be in a similar position. It experiences a world and builds explanations using concepts that appear within that world. But the source of experience itself may exist at a deeper level, one that cannot be fully described from inside the experience. This brings us to awareness. Not thoughts, not emotions, not images, but the simple fact that something is happening at all. Before you think a thought, before you feel an emotion, before you see an object, there is awareness. It is the space in which all experience appears. You cannot observe awareness as an object because any observation already happens within it. You can't step outside it. You can only notice that it's there. Silent, constant, unchanged by the content that moves through it. And here's the unsettling part. Awareness itself has no obvious boundaries. When you look for the edge of your awareness, you don't find one. You find sensations, thoughts, perceptions, but not a border. The idea that awareness is inside your head is just another thought appearing within awareness. If awareness has no clear boundary, then the separation between your mind and the world becomes questionable. Perhaps the world doesn't exist in your mind. Perhaps your mind exists in the world. Or perhaps both exist within something more fundamental than either. This is where many people feel a sense of vertigo. The familiar structure of reality begins to wobble. The solid world becomes less solid. The self becomes less defined. And certainty starts to erode. But instead of pushing that discomfort away, let's lean into it. Consider how memory works. Your sense of a continuous self depends almost entirely on memory. You remember being a child, a teenager, a younger version of yourself. You assume that because you remember these stages, you are the same person who lived them. But memory is not a recording, it is a reconstruction. Each time you recall a memory, it changes slightly. Details fade, emotions shift. New interpretations overwrite old ones. If your identity depends on memory, and memory is fluid, then your identity is not stable. It is a story constantly being rewritten. The same is true for the world itself. You believe the world existed yesterday because you remember it. You believe it will exist tomorrow because you expect it to. But both belief and expectation occur now, in the present moment. The past and future do not exist anywhere except as mental content appearing in awareness. From a direct experiential standpoint, there is only now. Not a moving now, travelling through time, but a single, ever-refreshing moment in which experience appears. The sense of time passing is constructed from memory and anticipation, stitched together into a narrative that feels continuous. If time is a mental construct, then reality does not unfold in time. Time unfolds in reality. Or more precisely, time unfolds in the mind. This has strange implications. It suggests that the universe is not a process moving forward, but a static field being sampled moment by awareness. Each moment is not the next frame in a movie, but a complete rendering, complete with a built-in memory of previous frames. In this view, continuity is an illusion, stability is an effect. The world feels persistent because each moment contains traces of the last. Like flipping through pages of a book very quickly, it feels like motion, but nothing is actually moving. Now apply this idea to yourself. What you call you might not be a continuous entity traveling through time. It might be a pattern that reappears moment after moment with slight variations. Each moment contains a memory of the previous one, creating the illusion of a single enduring self. If that's true, then what you really are is not the character in the story, but the space in which the story appears. You are not the thoughts. You are what notices the thoughts. You are not the emotions. You are what feels them. You are not the body. You are what experiences the body. And if you are that awareness, then the entire world appears within you. This is where the idea that reality only exists in the mind becomes both less frightening and more profound. It's not saying that nothing exists. It's saying that existence itself is inseparable from awareness. There is no world without experience. There is no experience without awareness. They arise together. But then another question emerges. If awareness is fundamental, why does it appear limited? Why do you experience one body, one perspective, one stream of thoughts instead of everything at once? One possibility is that limitation is a feature, not a flaw. Without limits, there would be no structure, no contrast, no experience. A reality with no boundaries would be indistinguishable from nothing at all. By focusing itself into a perspective, awareness creates form. By identifying with a body, it creates location. By identifying with a story, it creates identity. These limitations allow something to happen rather than nothing. From this angle, reality might not be something imposed on consciousness. It might be something consciousness chooses, again and again, to experience itself in a particular way. But this choice is not necessarily conscious in the way we usually mean. It may not be a decision made by a person. It may be an inherent tendency of awareness to differentiate, to explore, to experience contrast. This could explain why the world feels so convincing, why it feels external, why it resists your wishes. A reality that bent easily to thought would reveal itself as a mental construct too quickly. Stability makes the illusion immersive, and immersion allows experience. But cracks in the illusion do appear. Moments when reality feels unreal, when you suddenly feel like an observer behind your eyes, when the world looks flat or distant. when you question whether anything is truly solid. These moments are often dismissed as anxiety or dissociation, but they may be glimpses behind the curtain. They suggest that what you experience as reality is not as fixed as it appears, that it depends on attention, interpretation, and mental state. If attention shifts, reality shifts. This means that what you focus on literally shapes your experienced world, not just emotionally, but perceptually. Your brain prioritizes certain signals, suppresses others, and fills in gaps based on expectation. Two people can experience the same event and perceive entirely different realities. So which one is real? Perhaps neither, or perhaps both. Or perhaps reality is not a single objective thing, but a spectrum of experiences arising within awareness. If that's the case, then asking whether reality exists outside the mind might be the wrong question. The more precise question might be whether the concept of outside even applies. Everything you know about outside comes from inside experience. Distance, space, separation, all concepts appearing in consciousness. You cannot step beyond experience to check what lies beyond it. This does not trap you. It simply describes the situation honestly. You are not confined inside your mind. Your mind is where everything happens. And if everything happens there, then reality is not something you are lost in. It is something that unfolds within you, moment by moment, shaped by forces both understood and mysterious. The unsettling feeling this produces is not a sign of something being wrong. It's the feeling of old assumptions dissolving, of the mind loosening its grip on a familiar story. And as that story weakens, a deeper question begins to form. Not about the world, but about you. If the self you thought you were is just another appearance in awareness, then what remains when that idea starts to fade? If the self you usually identify with is not as solid as it seems, then what exactly disappears when that sense of self begins to loosen? Most people imagine the self as a kind of core, something stable behind the eyes, steering thoughts, making choices, experiencing life. But when you look closely, that core is difficult to find. Instead, what you discover is a collection of sensations, thoughts, memories, and emotions, all appearing and disappearing within awareness. Think about how a thought arises. You don't summon it deliberately most of the time. It simply appears. A word, an image, a memory enters awareness fully formed. You can react to it, follow it, resist it, but you didn't create it consciously. The same is true for emotions. A feeling of unease, joy, or sadness arises without asking permission. Even decisions often happen before you're aware of them. Neuroscience experiments show that the brain initiates actions milliseconds before the conscious mind becomes aware of having chosen them. If thoughts, emotions, and decisions arise on their own, then what exactly is the you that claims ownership of them? The sense of being a self may simply be another mental event, one that feels special because it sits at the center of experience. But feeling central does not mean being fundamental. It may just mean being familiar. This realization can be deeply destabilizing. If there is no solid self, then who is experiencing reality? Who is thinking these thoughts? Who is asking these questions? The answer seems paradoxical. Experience is happening, but there is no separate experiencer behind it. There is awareness, and within it, experience unfolds. The idea of a me observing it all is something that arises afterward, like a label attached to the flow. This doesn't mean you vanish. It means what you are is simpler and more elusive than you thought. Now consider how this ties back to reality itself. If the self is a construct appearing in awareness, and the world is also a construct appearing in awareness, then both are made of the same substance. Not matter, but experience. The boundary between inside and outside begins to blur. You normally feel like a subject looking out at objects, but that division might be artificial. Subject and object could be two sides of the same process, arising together. Without an object, there is no subject. Without a subject, there is no object. They define each other. This means reality might not be something you stand apart from. It might be something you are participating in at the deepest level. To see how strange this is, try this thought experiment. Close your eyes and imagine a red apple. You can see its shape, its color, maybe even its texture. That apple exists only in your mind. Now open your eyes and look at a real apple. From the inside, both experiences appear in the same place, awareness. One is labeled imagined, the other real, but both are experiences. What actually distinguishes them is not their appearance, but their behavior. The apple you see with open eyes behaves consistently. Others can interact with it. It follows rules. The imagined apple does not. But consistency does not automatically mean independence. A dream world can also be consistent while you're inside it. So the difference between imagination and reality may not be absolute. It may be a difference in degree, not kind. This leads to a provocative idea. What if waking reality is not the opposite of imagination, but imagination operating under stricter rules? Those rules could be what we call physical laws. Gravity, causality, time, constraints that give the world structure and predictability. But rules do not imply fundamental existence. A video game has rules, yet its world exists only while the game is running. If awareness is the system in which reality appears, then physical laws might be part of the rendering process, not the underlying truth. This could explain why reality feels both solid and strangely fragile. Solid because it follows rules. Fragile because those rules can break down under extreme conditions. Black holes, quantum events, altered states of consciousness. The closer you look, the less reality behaves like a fixed thing, and the more it behaves like a process. And processes require no permanent objects, they only require activity. So what is actually happening when you perceive the world? Signals arrive. Predictions are made. Interpretations arise. Memory fills in gaps. Meaning is assigned. All of this happens so quickly that it feels instantaneous. But it's a construction, not a revelation. Your brain stitches together fragments of information into a seamless experience, then presents it to awareness as what's happening. The sense of being located in a body, in a room, in a world is part of that presentation. Yet when you look for the exact point where you are located, you don't find it. You find sensations of pressure, visual perspectives, internal dialogue, but no central observer. Just experience happening. This absence is often ignored because it's uncomfortable. The mind prefers a story with a protagonist. A self gives continuity and purpose. Without it, things feel unmoored, but that discomfort may be pointing towards something true. If the self is not a thing but a process, then it doesn't exist independently. It exists only while it is being generated, and if the self is generated, so might be the world it believes itself to inhabit. This raises a subtle but important shift. Instead of asking whether reality exists only in your mind, you might ask whether mind and reality are two names for the same underlying activity. Perhaps there is only experience, and within experience distinctions appear. Self and world, inner and outer, real and imagined. These distinctions are useful, but they are not ultimate. This view helps explain why attempts to find a final, objective description of reality always fall short. Any description is part of the experience it describes. Language cannot step outside experience to capture it fully. Even science, for all its power, operates within this limitation. Instruments measure signals, data is interpreted, theories are formed, all within human awareness. Science can describe patterns within experience, but it cannot escape experience itself. This doesn't diminish science, it just places it in context. Now consider what happens when experience changes radically. In deep meditation, people report a collapse of the usual boundaries. The sense of self dissolves, the world loses its sharp edges. There is still awareness, but no clear division between observer and observed. Everything feels unified, seamless, immediate. In these states, the idea that reality exists out there feels absurd. There is just what is happening without labels. These experiences suggest that the way you normally experience reality is not the only way it can appear. It is one mode among many, a default setting, not a fixed truth. If reality can appear differently depending on mental state, then it cannot be entirely independent of the mind. At the very least, the form reality takes depends on perception. And if perception shapes reality, then changing perception changes reality. Not necessarily the external world, but the world as experienced. This brings us to an uncomfortable realization. If everything you know exists as experience, then certainty itself becomes questionable. You cannot be absolutely sure of anything beyond the fact that experience is happening. Even the statement "I exist" becomes slippery. What exists? A body? A mind? A self? Or simply awareness without qualities, without identity? This is where language breaks down. Awareness has no shape, no color, no location. It cannot be seen or measured. It is not an object among objects. And yet without it, nothing could appear. So perhaps awareness is not something you have. Perhaps awareness is what you are. If that is true, then the world you experience is not separate from you. It is an expression within you, a pattern of sensations, thoughts, and meanings arising in the same field that you call I. This doesn't mean you control it. Just as you don't control your thoughts or dreams, you may not control the arising of reality. But control is not the same as authorship. A storm arises without a controller, yet it is still a process of the atmosphere. Reality could be a process of awareness, and the self you identify with could be a local pattern within that process, mistaking itself for the whole. If this perspective feels disorienting, that's because it removes familiar reference points. The mind likes firm ground. It likes to know where it stands. But here, there is no fixed ground, only appearance and disappearance. Yet something remains unchanged through all of it. Not the self, not the world, but the fact that something is happening at all. Experience continues. Thoughts come and go. Perceptions shift. Identities evolve. But awareness remains, quietly witnessing it all without effort. If reality only exists in the mind, then the mind itself may not be a thing, but an activity within awareness. And awareness may not belong to you. It may be what gives rise to the sense of you in the first place. This realization doesn't answer all questions. It opens them, and once opened, they don't easily close again. Because if the self is not what you thought, and reality is not what it seemed, then the question is no longer philosophical. If awareness is what remains when the idea of a solid self begins to fade, then the next thing to examine is the structure of the world that awareness seems to reveal. Because even if the self is fluid, the world appears stubbornly stable. Tables don't dissolve when you stop believing in them. Gravity doesn't switch off when you question it. So how can reality be mind-dependent if it behaves as though it exists independently? The key lies in understanding that dependence does not mean fragility. A dream can feel incredibly stable while it's happening. It can have rules, continuity, cause and effect. Characters behave consistently. Landscapes persist. While you're inside the dream, nothing about it feels imagined. Stability alone does not guarantee independence. What matters is not whether reality follows rules, but whether those rules exist apart from experience. Every law of physics you know is a description of patterns observed within perception. Equations do not exist floating in space. They exist as symbols interpreted by minds. The regularities they describe are known only because awareness encounters them repeatedly. Without awareness, there is no recognition of pattern, no law, no measurement. This does not mean the patterns vanish when you stop paying attention. It means the concept of vanishing only has meaning within experience. The idea that the world continues unobserved is itself an assumption arising in awareness. You assume continuity because continuity is useful. It allows planning, survival, coordination. A mind that did not assume persistence would not function well. So the brain builds a model of a world that exists even when unseen. That model works so well that it feels like a direct perception of reality itself. But again, this is inference, not direct knowledge. Now consider how deeply your sense of reality relies on agreement. The world feels solid, partly because others confirm it. They see the same objects, follow the same rules, remember the same events. This shared experience reinforces the belief that the world is external and independent. But notice that you never experience other people's minds directly. You experience their bodies, their words, their actions, all as perceptions within your own awareness. Their agreement appears to you as another part of your experience. From your perspective, the entire social world exists as a pattern of experiences arising in consciousness. Other minds are inferred, not directly known. This doesn't mean other minds aren't real. It means your access to them is mediated by perception. The same is true for everything else. So the question shifts again. Instead of asking whether reality exists independently, we ask whether independence is even a coherent concept from inside experience. Independence from what? From awareness? But awareness is the medium in which all questions and answers appear. It's like asking whether a character in a novel exists independently of the page. The character can debate it endlessly, but from inside the story, there is no access to the page itself. Now let's look at how space and distance factor into this. You experience objects as being out there, at varying distances from your body. But distance is a perception. It's constructed from visual cues, depth perception, and memory. The sense of space is assembled by the brain to organize sensory input. In dreams, you also experience space, near and far, large and small, and yet that space exists entirely in the mind. The experience of distance does not require physical extension. It requires only the perception of separation. So the fact that objects appear far away does not prove they exist outside the mind. It only proves that the mind is capable of representing distance. The same applies to time. You experience events as happening before or after others. You remember causes and effects. But this ordering is constructed. In altered states, time can slow, speed up, or collapse entirely. Hours can feel like seconds. Seconds can feel like hours. If time were an absolute feature of reality, it would not behave this way. Its malleability suggests that it is, at least in part, a mental framework. This does not mean clocks are useless or physics is wrong. It means that the lived experience of time is not identical to whatever underlying structure might exist. What you experience is a version of time rendered for consciousness. So now we have a picture forming. Reality as experienced is a structured appearance within awareness. It has rules, patterns, continuity, and shared agreement. But all of these features are known only through experience and depend on mental processes to appear as they do. This brings us to a deeper layer of the question. If reality is mind-dependent, whose mind is it dependent on? At first glance, it seems like your personal mind. But this runs into problems. If the world exists only in your mind, what happens when you sleep or lose consciousness? Does the universe vanish? From your perspective, it does. You experience a gap, a blankness. Time disappears. Then suddenly, the world is there again. Seamless, continuous, as if nothing happened. But that continuity is reconstructed upon waking. Memory fills in the gap. You assume the world continued because it appears to have continued, but the experience of its continuation is inferred after the fact. This doesn't prove the world stops when you sleep. It simply shows that your knowledge of its continuation is indirect. So maybe reality depends not on your individual mind, but on something more fundamental. some form of awareness that does not turn off when personal consciousness fades. This is where some philosophies and traditions introduce the idea of a universal consciousness. Not a person, not a god in the usual sense, but a fundamental field of awareness in which individual minds are localized expressions. In this view, your awareness is not separate. It is a point of view within a larger whole, like a wave on the surface of an ocean. The wave has a shape and duration, but the water itself remains. If this is true, then reality does not disappear when you sleep, because awareness itself continues. What disappears is your localized perspective. When it returns, the world appears again, complete with a history. This idea might sound abstract, but notice how it aligns with experience. You never experience the beginning or end of awareness. You experience changes in content, not the disappearance of the field itself. Even in deep sleep, there is a sense, however faint, that something was there, because you later say you slept. The mind reports absence, but awareness itself leaves no memory. Now consider this possibility. Reality exists as a continuous field of experience, but individual minds sample it from particular angles. Each perspective feels central because it is the center of its own experience. From this angle, the question, does reality exist only in your mind, becomes misleading. Reality may exist in mind, but not in a personal mind. It may exist in consciousness itself, and personal identity may be a temporary focusing of that consciousness. This explains why the world feels shared and consistent, yet also deeply personal. It explains why different people can experience the same event differently. They are sampling the same field through different filters. It also explains why meaning feels subjective while structure feels objective. Meaning is layered on by personal context. Structure is shared because it arises from deeper patterns. If this is the case, then the world is not an illusion in the sense of being fake. It is an appearance, real as experience, but not necessarily fundamental. A rainbow is real as an experience, but it has no independent existence apart from perception. It arises from conditions. Change the conditions and it disappears. Reality could be like that. Not non-existent, but conditional. This reframes the unsettling nature of the idea. Instead of feeling like the ground is being pulled away, it becomes more like realizing the ground was never what you thought it was. It was always an appearance, stable enough to stand on, but not the ultimate foundation. The ultimate foundation, if there is one, may be awareness itself. And awareness does not need solidity. It does not need location. It does not need time. It simply needs to be. If you sit with this long enough, something interesting happens. The fear that often arises when questioning reality begins to soften. The anxiety about things not being real gives way to a quieter curiosity. Because if reality is an appearance within awareness, then the fact that it appears at all is remarkable. Meaning is not diminished by being experienced. It is created by it. The world does not lose value if it is mind-dependent. A dream can be profound. A thought can change a life. An emotion can reshape identity. What matters is not whether something exists independently, but whether it is experienced, and experience is undeniable. So the question may no longer be whether reality is real, but what kind of reality it is. Not a thing, but an event. Not an object, but a process. Not something you are trapped inside, but something unfolding within awareness. And as that understanding settles, another question quietly emerges, one that feels less abstract and more personal. As the idea of a central, permanent me begins to loosen, something unexpected often takes its place. Instead of a clear boundary between self and world, there is a sense of openness. Experience feels less like something happening to you and more like something simply happening. Sounds arise, thoughts appear, sensations move through awareness, and none of it seems to require an owner. This can feel unsettling at first, because ownership has always been part of the story. My thoughts, my body, my life. But when you look closely, ownership is an idea layered on top of experience, not something built into experience itself. A sound doesn't announce that it belongs to you, it just appears. A sensation in the body doesn't carry a label saying mine. That label is added afterward by thought, and thoughts themselves arise without asking who they belong to. So if ownership is a mental add-on, then reality without a central owner might be closer to how things actually are. This brings us to the question of control. If there is no solid self, then who is in control of experience? Most people assume they are, but that assumption rarely survives close examination. You don't control when thoughts arise. You don't control which emotions appear. You don't control the majority of bodily processes keeping you alive. Even attention often moves on its own, pulled by habit or interest. Control, like ownership, may be more of a story than a fact. This doesn't mean nothing influences what happens. It means influence is distributed across countless processes, many of which operate below conscious awareness. The sense of a single controller may simply be a convenient narrative that helps organize behavior. If that narrative dissolves, something interesting happens. Resistance softens. Experience becomes less about managing reality and more about witnessing it. This shift changes how reality feels. The world no longer appears as something you must constantly defend yourself against or manipulate to feel safe. Instead, it becomes a flow of events, some pleasant, some not, all arising within the same field of awareness. Now consider how this affects the question of whether reality exists only in the mind. If there is no central mind controlling or owning experience, then the phrase "your mind" becomes misleading. What you call your mind may just be a localized pattern within a much larger process. In this view, there is no separate container called the mind, holding reality inside it. There is only awareness, and within it, patterns arise that we label as thoughts, bodies, objects, and worlds. The mind is not a place, it is an activity. Reality is not inside it, reality is part of it. This perspective helps resolve a common confusion. People hear the idea that reality exists only in the mind and assume it means nothing matters. Everything is fake, or anything can be changed by thought alone. But that misunderstands the nature of the process. A wave does not control the ocean, even though it is made of water. A thought does not control awareness, even though it arises within it. A person does not control reality, even if reality appears through consciousness. So mind dependence does not imply omnipotence. It implies participation. You are not the author of reality, but you are not separate from it either. This also explains why suffering feels so real. Pain, fear, loss. These are not illusions in the dismissive sense. They are experiences, and experience is the only place meaning exists. Telling someone their suffering is just in the mind misses the point entirely. The mind is where everything that matters happens. If reality exists as experience, then experience is the measure of reality. This brings us to another subtle layer, meaning itself. Objects do not carry meaning inherently. A sound is just vibration. A mark on a page is just ink. Meaning arises when awareness interprets patterns. Without interpretation, there is no meaning, only raw sensation. So reality, as you know it, is not just constructed from sensory data, but from interpretation, from memory, context, language, and expectation. You don't just see a shape, you see a chair. You don't just hear noise, you hear words. This means the world you live in is not just physical. It is symbolic, and symbols exist only in minds. This doesn't reduce the world, it enriches it. It means reality is layered. Beneath the sensory level is raw experience. On top of it is interpretation. On top of that is narrative. And within that narrative, a self appears, trying to make sense of it all. When the narrative loosens, the rawness of experience becomes more apparent. Colors feel more vivid. Sounds feel more immediate. There is less distance between awareness and what appears in it. People sometimes describe this as feeling more real than ordinary reality, which is ironic because it arises when the usual assumptions about reality fall away. This suggests that what we call reality is not a single fixed mode of experience. It is a range, a spectrum, and the everyday mode we take for granted may be only one way awareness can experience itself. If that's true, then the question, what if reality only exists in your mind, is less a threat and more an invitation. An invitation to examine how rigid your assumptions are, how tightly you cling to a particular version of the world. Because the world you experience is not just given. It is continuously shaped by habits of attention, belief, and interpretation. Change those habits and the world changes. Not because the external universe rearranges itself, but because the way it appears does. This is why two people can live in the same environment and inhabit completely different realities. One sees threat everywhere. Another sees opportunity. One hears criticism. Another hears concern. The sensory input may be similar, but the experienced world is not. Reality, as lived, is subjective. Not arbitrary, but filtered. And the filter is not static. It can shift. Now consider the implications of this for identity. If the self is part of the narrative layer, then changing the narrative changes the self. You are not bound to one identity. You inhabit identities as stories, reinforced by repetition and memory. This doesn't mean you can become anything instantly. Stories have momentum. Habits take time to change. But it does mean the self is not a fixed entity locked inside a fixed reality. Both are dynamic. This dynamism is often hidden by routine. Familiar environments, predictable patterns, repeated roles. They create the illusion of solidity. But step outside routine, and the illusion weakens. Travel to a new place. Experience a crisis. Enter a deep, altered state. Suddenly, the world feels strange again. Less certain, less defined. Those moments reveal something important. Reality is not a thing you stand on. It is something you are moving with, and movement implies change. If reality exists only in the mind, then the mind is not a static container. It is an evolving process, and reality evolves with it. This doesn't make the world unreliable. It makes it alive. And if the world is alive as experience, then your relationship to it matters more than its supposed independence. You don't need reality to be out there to take it seriously. You only need to recognize that what you experience shapes who you are. Every perception, every thought, every emotion leaves a trace. Not in some external ledger, but in the structure of your awareness. Experience shapes the patterns that will arise next. In this way, reality is self-reinforcing. It feeds on its own history. The present moment is shaped by the past, which exists only as memory, which exists only now. So the world you inhabit today is not the same world you inhabited years ago. Not because the external universe changed dramatically, but because you did. And your change changed how reality appears. If there is a quiet truth hidden in all of this, it might be this. Reality is not something you need to escape from or solve. It is something you are continuously participating in, whether you realize it or not. And participation does not require certainty. It requires presence. As this understanding settles, the need to pin reality down begins to fade. You no longer need to decide whether it is real or imagined. Those labels lose their urgency. What remains is experience itself, unfolding without asking for permission. And within that unfolding, another question begins to form. Less about what reality is, and more about what happens when the mind stops trying to hold it in place. That question leads into territory where the idea of existence itself starts to feel strangely optional. When the mind stops trying to hold reality in place, something subtle changes. Experience becomes lighter, less rigid, as though the weight of needing things to be a certain way has been set down. This doesn't mean the world disappears or that life becomes unreal. It means the sense of solidity loosens. reality feels more like a current than a structure. This shift often reveals something surprising. The fear surrounding the idea that none of this exists begins to dissolve. What remains is not emptiness, but clarity. The fear was never about non-existence itself. It was about losing control, losing identity, losing certainty. But when you look closely, control was never truly there to begin with. Events have always unfolded on their own. Thoughts have always appeared uninvited. Life has always moved according to forces far larger than any individual perspective. The belief in control was part of the narrative that gave the self a sense of importance and safety. When that belief weakens, what's left is participation without ownership. Now consider the idea of existence itself. You assume things either exist or they don't. But existence, as experienced, is not binary. It comes in degrees. A vivid sensation feels more real than a vague thought. A dream feels less real once you wake, but while dreaming, it felt complete. A memory feels real in a different way than a physical object, yet it can carry immense emotional weight. So what does it actually mean to exist? Perhaps existence is not about being out there in some objective sense. Perhaps existence is about appearing in awareness. If something is experienced, it exists as experience. That may be the only meaningful definition available from inside consciousness. This reframes the original question entirely. Instead of asking whether reality exists only in the mind, we ask whether existence itself is inseparable from awareness. From this angle, the universe is not a collection of things, but a collection of appearances, patterns of sensation, thought, and meaning arising and dissolving. And appearances do not require permanence. A lightning strike exists as long as it flashes. A sound exists as long as it vibrates. A thought exists as long as it is thought. Their impermanence does not make them unreal. It defines their mode of existence. If this is true, then the idea that reality must exist independently to be real is unnecessary. Reality is real because it is experienced. Now let's explore a more unsettling implication. If reality is an appearance, then it has no inherent obligation to continue. It persists because the conditions that generate it persist. Change those conditions and the appearance changes or vanishes. This is not speculation. You experience it every night. The world you know disappears in deep sleep. And not replaced by darkness, but by nothing at all. No sights, no sounds, no self, no time. And yet, from that absence, experience returns. Where did reality go during that gap? From the perspective of waking consciousness, it simply stopped. From the perspective of awareness itself, there may have been no interruption, only a lack of memory. This suggests that continuity is not guaranteed. It is reconstructed. And if continuity is reconstructed, then the universe you experience now may not be the same universe you experienced before, even if it appears to be. Each moment may be a fresh appearance, carrying the memory of continuity, but not requiring it. This idea can feel destabilizing, but it also removes a subtle burden. If reality is always being renewed, then you are not trapped in a fixed structure. The past does not physically bind the present. It influences it only through memory. This means the present moment is more open than it seems. The openness is usually hidden by habit, by expectation, by the mind's tendency to project the past forward and call it reality. But when that projection loosens, the present feels wider, less predetermined. This is often described as a sense of spaciousness. Experience still happens, but there is more room around it. Less pressure to define, judge, or control. And in that space, something curious happens. The distinction between observer and observed continues to blur. There is less sense of me watching reality, and more sense of reality happening on its own. This does not erase individuality. You still have a body, a personality, preferences, but they feel lighter, less central, more like features of the experience than its source. This can bring a strange kind of relief. If you are not responsible for holding the world together, you can stop trying. Now let's look at the idea of meaning again, from this angle. If reality is an appearance, does meaning dissolve with it? Or does meaning arise precisely because of appearance? A poem does not lose meaning because it is made of words. A melody does not lose meaning because it fades when the sound stops. Meaning exists in experience, not in permanence. In fact, impermanence may be what gives meaning its intensity. If nothing changed, nothing would matter. The fleeting nature of experience gives it weight. So a reality that exists as experience, moment by moment, is not shallow. It is profound. It is alive. This perspective also changes how you relate to uncertainty. Instead of seeing uncertainty as a problem to be solved, it becomes a fundamental feature of existence. Reality is not something that can be fully pinned down because it is not a static thing. The mind often wants final answers, solid conclusions, something to stand on. But here, the ground itself is moving, and that movement is not a flaw. It is what allows experience to happen at all. Now consider how this affects the fear of non-existence. If reality only exists in the mind, then what happens when the mind stops? What happens at death? From this perspective, death is not the end of something solid. It is the end of a particular pattern of experience, the end of a certain narrative, a certain point of view. What happens next cannot be known from inside the narrative, just as you cannot know what comes after falling asleep while you are awake. You can only know that experience has returned before. This does not guarantee anything. It does not promise continuation. It simply removes the assumption that non-existence is something to fear. Non-experience is not experienced. Fear belongs to experience. And experience only happens when awareness is present. So the fear of nothingness is always imagined from within somethingness. This realization doesn't answer existential questions in a comforting way. It dissolves them by revealing their assumptions. If reality exists as appearance, then asking what happens when it disappears is like asking where a wave goes when it flattens. The question assumes the wave was an independent thing, but it was always water in motion. Similarly, the self may not go anywhere. It may simply stop appearing, and what remains may not be an object or an experience at all, but the absence of experience, which cannot be known from within experience. This is not nihilistic, it is honest, and honesty has a strange calming effect. It removes the need to invent stories to protect the self. It allows you to meet reality, whatever it is, as it appears, without needing it to be more. As this understanding deepens, the mind naturally becomes quieter. Not because thoughts stop, but because fewer thoughts feel necessary. The constant effort to define, secure, and explain begins to relax. And in that relaxation, something subtle becomes apparent. The world feels closer, more intimate, not because it is owned, but because it is not. There is no barrier between awareness and what appears, no distance to cross, no separation to overcome, just experience unfolding. At this point, the question, is any of this real, loses its edge. Real compared to what? Real for whom? What matters is that something is happening, and that happening does not require belief. It requires only awareness. As this sinks in, one final layer remains to be examined. Not the nature of reality or the self or existence, but the strange sense that all of this, however fleeting, is happening for some reason at all, not a purpose in the usual sense. The question of why anything appears at all is one the mind cannot resolve in the usual way. Every explanation relies on something else. Causes point to prior causes. Reasons lean on deeper assumptions. Eventually, the chain ends not with an answer, but with silence. And that silence is not empty. It is simply beyond explanation. Yet the appearance continues. This suggests that reality may not need a reason in the way the mind expects. The demand for reason itself may be part of the mental framework, not a requirement of existence. The mind asks why, because it evolved to predict, control, and survive. But existence itself may not operate according to those needs. A sunrise does not need a purpose to occur. It happens because conditions allow it to happen. In the same way, reality may appear simply because appearance is possible. This shifts the focus away from meaning as explanation and toward meaning as experience. When you stop asking what reality is for, and instead notice that it is, something changes. The pressure to justify existence dissolves. There is no longer a need to earn reality or explain it away. Experience becomes sufficient on its own terms. This does not make life shallow. It makes it immediate. Now consider how often the mind lives somewhere other than where experience is happening. It drifts into memory, replaying the past. It projects into imagination, rehearsing the future. Meanwhile, the present moment continues, unnoticed, unfolding without commentary. If reality exists as experience, then the present moment is the only place reality ever appears. Not as a point in time, but as the field in which all perceptions arise. The mind often treats the present as a bridge between past and future, something to be endured while waiting for something else. But from this perspective, the present is not a transition. It is the whole thing. Past and future exist only as thoughts appearing now. This realization can feel subtle at first, almost disappointing. The present moment is ordinary, familiar, but stay with it long enough and its ordinariness becomes strange. Sounds happen without effort. Sensations arise without explanation. Thoughts appear and vanish like weather. The more closely you look, the less solid anything becomes. And yet, something remains unchanged through all of it: the fact that experience is happening. This fact does not depend on interpretation. It does not require belief. It does not ask for validation. It simply is. You cannot doubt it because doubt itself is an experience. So perhaps this is the most fundamental truth available. Something is appearing. Not to someone. Not for a reason. Simply appearing. From this perspective, the idea that reality exists only in the mind becomes almost trivial. Of course it does, because experience is the only place existence can be known. But that does not make existence small. It makes it immediate. It also dissolves the final separation between ordinary life and philosophical insight. There is no hidden realm to access, no special state required. What you are looking for is already happening. The mind often imagines that understanding will come as a dramatic revelation, a sudden shift, a clear conclusion, but what actually happens is quieter, a gradual loosening, a sense that the questions themselves are less urgent. You stop needing to resolve reality into a concept, and in that space something gentle emerges: acceptance, not resignation, but a simple openness to whatever appears. This acceptance does not mean passivity. Actions still happen. Choices are still made. Life continues. But there is less struggle around it, less insistence that things must conform to an idea of how reality should be. This can change how suffering is experienced. Pain still hurts. Loss still aches. But there is less layering of resistance on top of it. Less mental friction. Suffering becomes part of the flow, not an argument against existence. And because suffering is experienced, not abstract, it can be met directly rather than philosophized away. This is one of the paradoxes of this perspective. Recognizing the constructed nature of reality does not detach you from life. It often brings you closer to it. Colors feel brighter. Sounds feel clearer. Moments feel fuller. Because when you stop treating reality as something to figure out, you start treating it as something to live. Now consider the original fear again. The fear that if none of this truly exists, then nothing matters. That life is meaningless. That everything dissolves into emptiness. But this fear assumes that meaning must come from permanence or external validation. That something must exist independently to matter. Yet think about the moments that have mattered most to you. A conversation, a glance, a realization, a fleeting experience that changed you. Their value did not come from lasting forever. It came from being experienced fully. Meaning does not require eternity. It requires presence. So a reality that exists as experience is not impoverished. It is rich, dense, immediate. And if awareness is the field in which this richness appears, then awareness itself does not need to justify what it experiences. It does not need to explain why it exists. It simply allows experience to unfold. At this point, the question, what if reality only exists in your mind, has transformed. It no longer feels like a threat. It feels like a description of something intimate and unavoidable. Reality exists where you are, not as a possession, not as a belief, but as what is happening. And what is happening does not need to be named to be real. The world does not need to exist outside awareness to be meaningful. Awareness is where meaning happens. So perhaps the deepest shift is not in how you think about reality, but in how lightly you hold your thoughts about it. Less certainty, less resistance, more curiosity, more presence. As this understanding settles, there is one final layer left. Not a conclusion, but a quiet ending. Not an answer, but a recognition. Because if reality is an appearance in awareness, then awareness itself is not moving toward anything. It is not seeking completion.